When are we allowed to use freedom of speech? Is it always? Is it depends? Does it exist? Does it really, when people say, even in law, you have the right. Okay, well, what do we mean the right? Can you use it all the time? Does it exist in the public forum, in the public square? Literally, you can go downtown and with a microphone, with a loudspeaker, and are you allowed to do that? And also in the public forum on the internet, are you allowed to do that? When it's not permissible, who decides? At work, universities, colleges, the College of Physicians, for example, because on Facebook you post something about something we don't like. Yeah. Nothing to do with the medical profession, right, or nothing, but then all of a sudden it's that we're in the school division, we're going to punish you because you have expressed some views that we don't agree with. When is it being restricted? Who should decide? And why? And also based on what? And then even in the Catholic context, the church says you can express things, but also you have to use circumspection. You have to be respectful, or do you have to be respectful?
And what does that even mean? Like, what is respect?
Right.
Do we owe each other respect or civility? Yeah, where to even get started? So today we're talking about free speech, and where do we get started with free speech?
Well, what do we
so
understand?
many possibilities.
Yeah, so we're going to have a dialogue, a respectful dialogue, and we're going to, this is the paradox. We're talking about free speech, expressing our ideas. So we have freedom of ideas, of thought. And this is a good example of in a forum, in a private forum, we can express ideas. Because we have freedom of speech. So we can talk about what do we understand by freedom of speech? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, as you alluded to earlier, we kind of have legal definition of free speech, but we also have other definitions of free speech. You know, some people think that issuing threats or calls to violence falls under freedom of speech, whereas that is condemned by the law, so that would not count as free speech. But now there are movements to condemn hate speech, which traditionally has fallen under free speech. So we have a legal definition, but even the legal definition of free speech is changing. And there are implications because how the law is interpreted and how we understand free speech in the context of a broader community. That is going to be an ongoing discussion, if we're allowed to, if that's still freedom of speech. But already, I mean, you're seeing freedom of speech being trampled on in places where different people and different groups have a different opinion as to what constitutes free speech, especially in university campuses. So certain things you're not allowed to talk about, like the fact that there's two genders.
Ooh. There are two sexes.
Yeah, so that in and of itself shows that there's not only a legal definition, but there is different communities with their own idea of free speech. And if free speech is really a freedom guaranteed to all people, to what extent can that be taken away from you in private forums, such as university, but also online?
And you mentioned a few things. Certain things are to do with opinions. Other things, when it comes to speech and freedom of speech, it comes to facts and opinions. And also what is the common good, because as you say, it could be harmful if you are threatening somebody or if you are creating distress or alarm. If you are in the theater, the typical example, and if you shout fire, right, then you can cause a stampede and you can cause harm. And you might say, well, I have the freedom of speech. I can shout whatever I want. But by law, they say, well, hang on, it might cause harm because if you say fire or if you propose violence, then as a society, they say, no, you cannot do that, right? So there are restrictions. Yes, so this is one of the principles. In principle, there is a freedom of the right to express your opinions or views or whatever you want to express. But then immediately society or the court system says, no, there are restrictions. So you have the right, but you don't really have the right. There are certain limits. And then the criteria is, it can cause harm.
Right.
Potentially can cause, and also it might not be true. And that's an area when you say, well, there are only two sexes. What's not true about it? Well, you might offend somebody. Well, if you say, well, I don't know, the sun goes around the earth. So there, or even we saw that during the COVID times, physicians were not allowed to express certain opinions based on science or their own medical background that went against what society, the governments, or the colleges of physicians had determined that you were allowed to do this, and you were supposed to support the government in this policy. And if you contradicted that, you were going to be punished, disciplined. And they were restricting the freedom of speech. And they were saying, if you express this to your patients, we're going to discipline you. So that's another example when all of a sudden it goes against, not so much to do with facts, but opinions. And at times the reality is power, which is part of the discussion. Who decides to restrict the freedom of speech of somebody else's? Usually it comes down to power. I have the power over you. And when we say power is the ability to control you, to make you do something or not to do something. Because obviously if I said to you, Adam, I don't want you to do X. So, well, and who are you, Jesus, to restrict me? I don't have the power over you. But professionally, or even as a society, if I can put you in prison or I can take you to court, then we are exercising power. So at times with opinions, it comes down to conventions in society, something that it was true 50 years ago and it was considered not polite. Now it's being promoted and vice versa. So that's part of the discussion. It's always been like that. Then there is the freedom of speech in the public arena, in the public forum. And also in the private area, even professionally, whether it's at university or in your organization, your association, your company, are you free to express whatever you want? Well, if you, for example, express something that is going to help with the organization, maybe you are. But if you are going to say that the competition, you are going to on Twitter or Facebook or with your colleagues, you are going to promote the competition, probably you might lose your job because they are saying you are promoting our competition and you're not supporting our interests. Yes, you do have the freedom of speech, but we have to exercise to be circumspect. We have to exercise also prudence because there are consequences.
Yeah.
And that's something that in society, we all do it when you are having dinner with your family or your friends or your colleagues or at work. We don't just say anything that comes to mind.
Right.
We immediately, we have a sieve that we have learned from the moment we were born to say, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, this is respectful, this is disrespectful. So we have that mental part of our society.
So this is good. You brought up a lot of points, and I think you've done a good job of illustrating that that speech itself is not only just a legal concept, but it's also how we go about our behavior, how we go about basic things in our everyday life. It's not just whether you say something in the public forum that's offended someone or harmed someone, but it's as simple as sitting at the dinner table and choosing, using prudence to just dictate what you talk about. At some dinner tables, they will talk about anything, even topics that are not appropriate for the dinner table. Whereas other households, they may discuss more appropriate matters at the dinner table. So then, of course, you have to ask, okay, well, to what extent can we police speech? Because, of course, everyone has the natural freedom to say what they want when they want. But then under what settings is there consequences, and under what settings ought there to be consequences? And that would stretch from the private life, in your private residence, to what you say in the public forum. Obviously, in your private residence, there's more you can talk about because that's your private residence, and your private opinions don't have the same effect as when you express yourself publicly for others to hear, because of course you have to take into account scandal, you have to take into account the influence you have on others, especially the innocent, like children. There are certain things that you can talk about around adults that you really shouldn't be talking about around children, which is, to sustain, to allow children to have innocence and not be exposed to matters that concern adults. Yeah. So before we get into all of that, you mentioned the implications, especially during the pandemic, and the coercive speech. It's interesting because usually speech that is intended to produce violence or a threat is not covered under free speech. But now we have this added principle of harm, that, you said something that I disagree with, or this goes against what I believe. Therefore, it's hate speech and you shouldn't be allowed to say it. And I've even heard people say that you don't have a right to offend me. What do we make of this? Where is the culture going with this? And what kind of ramifications is this going to have legally moving forward? How can they say, well, you can't say that because someone else might be offended. They have a right not to be offended, and therefore you've harmed them. That's actually violence against them just by expressing your opinion.
Right. And well, the hate speech, the concept is fairly new. It's only a few decades, and it was made up. It's one of those concepts, how we manipulate the language as a society and how we use terms. Precisely, we weaponize the language to exercise control power over other people. And the term hate speech in itself is one of those great examples when language is being weaponized. Even the Supreme Court of Canada hasn't defined the term hate speech. And the question is, who is going to decide on that, right? Who has not only the authority, but how do you make a reference to that? Not only who decides, but what constitutes, for example, offense, because that's very subjective. With libel, for example, defamation is more objective, which is also part of the freedom of speech. I can say, I'm free to say something that is not true about somebody. And then typically, traditionally, the courts have said, you don't have the right to defame somebody, to libel somebody, because it causes harm.
Do you think that that's a just law?
Absolutely.
Why? Because
it causes harm. It causes harm on the individual. It's not fair, first of all. It's not just. You are defaming somebody. You are saying something that is not true about somebody, and you are going to cause harm. That person is going to lose his job, the family, the property, can end up in prison. So you have caused, and when it was not true, right? So that's why by law you say you cannot do that.
So that would be, but one would argue, okay, well, that person's just exercising their free speech, their opinion.
Right.
That's their opinion.
And then as a society we say, no, you are not allowed to do that, because the consequences are, you do have the freedom, but the other person has the the right to his good name
Right.
and the reputation. And that trumps your right to say something that is not true.
So then, could it be the case that the woke mob that is calling for these hate speech laws, oh, you can't say that, you can't say anything negative about the LGBT, do you think that that's their way of framing the argument, that you can't say anything about the LGBT because it scandalizes us and it makes us look bad and it defames us? Even though what you're saying may be true, it's still defamation. You shouldn't be able to say it.
Well, it's part of the, as they call it now, part of the debate in society, and things change very quickly in societies. A few decades ago, again, certain things that they were not allowed to, you couldn't broadcast, you couldn't talk about or teach about in the school system or at university or in the media, and then they changed the legislation. So it's part of that reframing and changing the goalpost, so to speak. But one of the principles, you have to be careful, you as a society, you have to be careful what you want for or you're asking for, because the door swings both ways. If we establish a law that says you cannot say something that I don't like, which is when we weaponize the language and we say you are offending me, well, offense is one thing, which is also very subjective. The other way of saying is I don't like it, which is different. Because offense, it requires intention. I'm going to say something that I know is going to offend you. But if I say, I like this jacket, I don't like your jacket, you're offending me because this is disgusting. Well, that is subjective. It's ridiculous, but we have reached a point in our society that I don't agree with your opinion, I don't like it, but I'm going to say that not only you're offending me, that what you are saying is hate speech. Well, what do you mean by hate speech? I usually say, well, I hate coffee, or I hate this, or I hate this weather. You might say, I don't like it, but hate speech, how do you prove that how do you know that this person really hates something? And even if you hate somebody, I hate this individual, I hate this politician, I hate politicians, so I hate lawyers. Just because you genuinely hate that individual or that group, am I supposed now to punish you and send you to prison, or you have to pay a fine because generally you hate somebody? That's part of the debate, right? Especially when you haven't even caused any harm. Now, when I say that the door swings both ways, this is interesting because every time you open the media, you open the newspapers and you look on the internet, there is, whether it's here in Canada, the CBC or the local newspapers, you can always argue that there is a lot of hate speech against Christians and against Christianity. Yes. Anything to do with Christianity, we don't want Christianity to be even taught, even though by law they're allowed to. But then the part of the influence, you're not allowed to. And how the headlines are depicting Christians and Christianity, you can argue that that is an example of hate speech, because they're also promoting animosity towards a protected category under the Canadian law.
That is the interesting phenomenon here, especially as Catholics. As Christians, we are taught to love good and hate evil. And with hate speech laws and the emerging narrative that is going to be dictating what one can or cannot say, it's very telling the direction we're going, because what the hate speech laws seem to indicate is that hate speech will posit that you can only say bad things about the good, about Christianity, the truth, and religion. Hate speech laws will stand in opposition to truth. And that's the product of living in a pagan, godless society, Whereas, 60, 70 years ago, when society still was by and large Christian, or at least people adhered to Christian principles, the hate speech laws then actually condemned what was evil. It elevated good things like the family, right? This whole concept of nuclear family, of marriage, of raising kids and being educated in truth. They didn't tolerate sodomy. You weren't allowed to display that in the public. You weren't allowed to, none of this was promoted. And even things like immodest dress was strictly regulated in Hollywood until the, I believe, 1960s. And those were good things because they promoted virtue.
Right.
And it reinforced Christian principles, which are good. Now we have the inverse of that. So everything that was good in Christian society is now turned on its head. It's deemed evil.
Right.
And the promotion of sodomy and the promotion of feminism and the destruction of the family, well, those are all the new virtues that are promoted and protected by hate speech laws.
Yeah, and then when we talk about laws, it would be the role of individuals, Christians, who could employ. That's why I say the door swings both ways, because then you can always, in Christians who can take the issue to the court system and say, what is being displayed or what is being taught in certain instances in the school system or at university, it causes harm. And even by law, if you look at the laws of the different provinces here in Canada, you can always argue, for example, when it comes to the school system, that if something potentially causes harm to the children, is not allowed. So you can always argue that. Good luck with that, because then if you take it to the court system or even the Human Rights Commission in the different provinces here in Canada, they might not agree with you, and they might say, well, we're going to dismiss this case.
Yep.
So because they have the power, but at least you could try, and it might help. The reality is when those things are being promoted that objectively can cause, or potentially or in reality cause damage. That's the problem, that they are being promoted things that we know that is not good for society, for the individual, for society, and then society pays a high price.
Yes.
And you mentioned immorality or wanton behavior that in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term causes harm to individuals, families, and society at large.
Yep.
That's now. And then our role as a society is to try to aim higher and try to look for what is good. And especially in your position, if you are in charge of a school, well, trying to make sure that you only teach something that is good, that is beautiful, and that is true. And if you have an organization or an association, very much the same. If you are a brother or a sister or the father of the family, try to influence in your area. If you are in charge of a blog or a YouTube channel, trying to say, well, I'm going to allow this, but I'm not going to allow this because it's not true, or it's going to defame, or it's going to create potentially harm. Which is the paradox is in many organizations, like YouTube, for example, they say, we don't like it, we're going to ban or restrict or censor this your opinion, just because you don't go along with what we think or we are trying to support. So it works both ways, right?
Do you think that there are instances where opinions ought to be censored? And could you give an example of an opinion that ought to be censored and perhaps a counterexample?
We do it all the time. We do it even in the private realm. You are at home and you have opinions and you say, well, I'm in front of my parents or my mother-in-law or my spouse, and I'm not going to express this because again, out of respect, out of at times courtesy or at times good manners. If you're having dinner with, I don't know, you're having a dinner and you are just being a guest, you are not going to make a scene. What you are saying is wrong, and you're entitled. And especially when it comes to certain topics, could be politics, and we all know about if the host supports a particular political party or a particular politician, and you disagree. You as a guest, you are not going to say, you know what, you are absolutely wrong. You have to be prudent, respectful. You can still express your opinions in different ways. Also, exercise prudence. How important is this? Is the person, if it's with politics, with other issues, again, you can also express your opinion maybe in a private way. For example, at work or in the family, you might do it more discreetly. Depends on the issue. Give me examples, and then we can.
An example of
somebody when our opinion shouldn't be expressed or should be expressed.
Well, an opinion should not be expressed. In fact, this, I think, is why I'm not a free speech absolutist, is because any opinion that expresses evil should not be...
And how do you define that? And who decides that?
Well, as Catholics, the church decides that. And we adhere to the laws of the church because they are given to us by God through the valid successors of the hierarchy, and they're good rules to follow. We know through, in theory and in application, that when you know that homosexuality is abominable, that cross-dressing is abominable, and you follow these limits of expression that God laid out for us, then of course we see that you can build and cultivate a good society. And we should actually censor evil according to divine law, according to natural law, because the absence, by censoring out evil, you allow good to cultivate. When you have this notion of absolute free speech, well, you're allowing a lot of bad, immoral opinions. And you even have to look at the history. What was the premise of absolute free speech by thinkers like, what's his name? John Mill? Is that right? I'm blanking on his name now. But you have very liberal thinkers, and they were proponents of free speech. Why? Because they didn't like the evils that the church was censoring. And with the liberal and modernist revolutions across Europe and the introduction of absolute free speech, yes, you allow all these bad ideas into the forum, but not everyone is equipped to deal with them, and they're not equipped to see the truth. And in fact, the problem with evil ideas is a lot of them sound good, and then you're swayed by them. And now all of a sudden, this evil, which had been censored for good reason, is now discussed in the forum. And now we're debating, how many genders are there?
It's part of the strategy. That's right. It's part of the strategy of trying to create debate precisely to normalize.
Yes. But that, coming back to your question, my answer would be opinions that express evil ought to be censored because evil has no right. Evil has no right. And the problem with the society currently is that we're giving evil a platform, and evil is actually ruling the day, and they're trying to suppress the good.
And also the reality is now those who have power restrict and censor opinions to do with Christianity. We see that in the school system. We see that in the public forum, or in the media, even in the public square. If people who have been fined and arrested for praying. We have seen cases, famous cases in the UK and in Canada also. People have been fined. So that's the reality, that now the paradox or the irony is that those who are proclaiming the gospel, so to speak, the good news, are being restricted, are being fined, are being at times fired from positions. And even professionally, there was a famous case years ago here in Canada. There was a school teacher who was using Facebook to talk about his ideas, opinions, precisely about immorality, against immorality, promoting and deviant behavior. And the Association of Teachers in his province disciplined, punished him. And then the court the case ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada. And the Supreme Court of Canada said, yes, you are, because his argument was, I have the right to freedom of speech. And I was using this in my Facebook, not professionally, but in my private life. And the Supreme Court of Canada said, yes, you do have that freedom, but because you are a teacher, you are a public figure, therefore you have to follow some professional conduct, and the Association of Teachers does have the right to punish you. And that was the end of it. So in a way, going back to how we started the conversation, yes, there are restrictions, and it comes down to who has the power partly who has the power, and also as a society, it's important to keep talking about these things, to try to influence, as we all do. The same as now there are certain individuals and groups who are influencing, promoting things that are objectively harmful, and it deviates. And you can even, as you more or less pointed out, it can be a deviant or degenerate behavior. And you say, well, should we accept that as a society? Well, they keep promoting it. And then by the same token, you can always say, it's our role to try to promote the moral, what is good, the beautiful, and what is true. And it's a constant battle. Just because both groups are not going to give up, which is part of who we are as an individual. So it's a constant battle. It's a battle.
Yeah, that's right. Do you think that, I'll give you an example. Do you think that, in cases where famous sports players are promoting the sodomy agenda, they're saying, it's good for people to come out and to embrace themselves in this. Do you think that ought to be protected speech for them to express that opinion publicly as a prominent figure of society?
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, I always ask myself if I read a headline and say, okay, why is he saying or she saying this? Which from my point of view, I'm looking at why is somebody doing that? At times there is a political agenda. Again, at times it's to do with power gain, but what's the gain? But even the bottom line is, if I smoke, I'm not going to all of a sudden saying, I'm going to come out as a smoker and I'm going to try to promote smoking. Or if if you are interested in, do you see my point that I would always ask myself, why do I have the urge to try to promote something that maybe I'm not very proud of? But again, it could be at times psychologically, some people feel guilty about it, and then they feel the urge that if I'm going through this, I want everybody to know about this, and then to try to get, it's almost like a pyramid scam, trying to get more people to your way of thinking and behavior. Yeah. I don't know. It's how we started the conversation. Yeah, it should be restricted. It shouldn't be allowed because, again, you can't. It's like having dinner. It's like just because you have done something that is, that you shouldn't have done it, you're not going to start saying in the middle of the dinner, I'm going to tell you what I've done something wrong, that I know it was wrong, but I want to come out to tell you about something that I did wrong. I'm going to tell you about why stealing or defaming people and how nasty I was towards so and so, and people will be shocked. So, well, I have the right, and I want you to start doing the same as I did and yet that's exactly what we're doing as a society.
Yeah.
We are all sinners, and then what we are saying effectively is, the sin is good. And if you are trying to promote virtue, that is bad, and we're going to ban you. And something that comes to mind. A few years ago here in Winnipeg, there was a young lady who wanted to run to be part of the school division, one of the trustees of the school division. And she said, as a trustee, if I get elected, I want to promote the virtue of being celibate. Chastity, it was actually chastity. Yep. As part of the discussion, that objectively, if you are a young person, being chaste is good for you. Well, there was a whole campaign, the media and the newspaper started campaigning, how does she dare? How she should not be allowed to try to promote the virtue of chastity, of being chaste. In the medical manuals, there are no examples of somebody getting sick by being chaste and being celibate and abstaining. No, you are not going to go to hospital saying, what happened to him? Well, he was being chaste or she was being chaste. And yet the campaign against that young woman was relentless, and they prevented her. So that's the paradox, that now trying to promote virtue is almost a sin.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too. So coming back to the defamation, we know, as you said, that defamation should not be under the umbrella of free speech because objectively it's unjust. Why is it unjust? Because you are expressing a false opinion that has direct consequences against the person that is innocent of whatever accusations you're holding against them. Now, that principle, so defamation, why is it not under free speech? Well, it's unjust. And why do we know it's unjust? Because you are premising accusations against someone that has detrimental effects that is based on a lie.
Right.
And why is that evil? Well, coming back to natural law and the 10 Commandments, lying is a sin.
But why is it a sin? Because it causes damage. It's harmful.
Because not only, it's not only a sin to lie because we know a natural law is written on the heart of every person. We know objectively that it's wrong, but also God said it's wrong. And we know that God exists.
From a practical point of view, if you're an architect or you're an accountant, or you're an engineer or you're a doctor and you lie in your reports and in your plans and your designs, potentially it can cause a disaster.
Right.
The building can collapse, the company can fail.
Right. So and here's another paradox for you. If we know that lying, we see the disastrous effects of what happens when we give people the right to lie, meaning they're entitled to lie without consequence, then obviously that's not good. And there are catastrophic consequences from that. Yet there's this move to unjustly promote and not censor homosexuality in the public forum. And look at the rampant consequences of the homosexuality agenda, where now you have kids learning that they're not the gender they've been assigned at birth in grade school. You have families falling apart. You have kids that are taking hormones and ruining and destroying their body. nothing good is coming from this, and it's all rooted. Why are they allowing this? Well, it's let little Timmy express himself the way Timmy feels like. Let him do what he wants. And it comes back to the satanic virtue of do what thou wilt. It's no, let Timmy decide. And Timmy can decide. Let him do what he wants.
And the non-Servian, I will not serve. In this case, I will not serve the truth. And
that's right.
What is the truth? The truth, basically, when something matches the reality.
Yes.
And even scientifically, but scientifically, at times there are certain things that is not to do with science itself, but it's more to do with, again, when we say ethics or morality, something that is going to be objectively good. And the problem is, referring to the topic you are talking about, it causes harm, right? Because those individuals, either psychologically they are struggling, they had to express or to experience trauma, and then if you don't have a supportive network, you are going to express that trauma in different ways. But then the consequences, if you're taking hormones which you don't need, then there are going to be consequences. If you are castrating yourself, there are consequences psychologically and physically. And we know from people who are already talking about it, the consequences are horrendous. So there is damage. Literally, there is damage. And you have to feel very sorry about those individuals, because the way I look at it, they are the victims. They are victims. They are victims of circumstances and at times ideology that can be harmful. The same way if somebody says, different topic, but when the smoking at the beginning, I remember seeing the old advertisements that smoking was being promoted, and it was considered cool, and even in the 19th century, physicians are recommending this.
That was 20th century.
And even as a society, again, because there is a lot of money to be made, so they were promoting for decades and decades. I think with many of these things that we are talking about today, it will come to pass that society will realize that the damage is actually it's already happening in England. They are already closing down certain clinics. But again, they were allowed to promote that. And then it's only when the damage was proven that it was horrendous, then they say, well, maybe we should rethink about this. With the media, it's very much the same in society. And I think, fortunately, there are a lot of people, good people, people of goodwill, who are fighting, trying to say, no, this is not, it's like in a family, little Johnny, this is not good for you. And it's part of the education. And as a society is trying to promote that education, good values, to develop a cultural capital when you are being trained to discern what is good, what is bad, what is moral, what is immoral, what is ethical, what is unethical. And that's what we are doing. That's why having conversations is important. Freedom of speech to try to promote what is good, what is true, what is beautiful is crucial. And also trying to develop, as we said, a sense of decorum, a sense of good manners, a sense of etiquette, even in how we behave, and also being prudent. There are certain things that, yes, we could say many, many things, but prudence advises and to be circumspect, look at the consequences, because when you say something, there are consequences for good and for bad. If you talk to people who are in the 70s, 80s, they remember things that the parents, the teachers, somebody said to them 60 years previously. Why? Because the things that we say have consequences. And it can be harmful. It could be quite the opposite. It can be beneficial, but that's why we have to exercise prudence, a good character, good judgment. Not everybody has it, and that's the reality. Not everybody has had the opportunity to develop that good judgment, good characters, good manners, and a sense of decorum. Decorum. That there are certain things which is a virtue.
To move towards our concluding of this conversation, I just want to touch on, before free speech was even law, it was condemned by numerous popes of the past for the exact reason that to allow free speech is to beg for evil, because during Christian civilization, you were allowed to talk about anything as long as it was good. You weren't allowed to talk about things that were evil generally in the public forum. There was no discussing, whether it's, whether there should be kids that are on hormone blockers, obviously. But so you have a civilization that agreed that the common good was to live a good life and reach salvation. And when Christian civilization underwent the Reformation and the so-called Enlightenment, the notion of free speech was not to allow anything good, anything new that was good to be spoken about, because of course anything that was good was already permitted. You were already permitted to have that conversation publicly. So it was the only thing to gain by free speech, the introduction of free speech in society, was to allow a platform for sedition, for evil. Fast forward, and now we see the consequences of that not even 500 years later, where people can pretty much talk about anything. Mm-hmm. And now it's coming to a point where the inverse is happening, as I was saying. Just 70 years ago, you could publicly speak about things that were good, like the family, whereas now, not so much.
Right.
Given that,
well, you can speak about the family, right, on YouTube.
Oh yeah, well, of course.
You can talk, and you can talk.
But it's being attacked. It's being attacked by governments, by special interest groups.
And at times it's very subtle. Those attacks,
yes,
it's very undermining things with the language, with images. If you turn on the TV,
yes,
at times it's very subtle. Even when you look at the magazines to do with parenting. You open the magazine and there's usually just a mother and a child.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to get to. So with kids, obviously a major problem of free speech and allowing people to express whatever opinion, no matter how evil it is, in the public forum. Kids are obviously a prime target of this, because adults who are grounded in their beliefs, they're less likely to be malleable to new beliefs, whether they're good or evil. Right. But children are very influential. And the problem I see with free speech, especially absolute free speech, and allowing evil people with evil beliefs who are endeavoring to teach evil to the youth, that's a massive problem, because especially in schools where you have teachers who oftentimes are not good, upstanding, moral people, that is a bad influence on children. That is immoral. And what do we as Catholics do now is what I want to get to. So what do we as Catholics do now, given the consequences of free speech, and now this move towards suppression of speech once again, but in inverse of what Christian civilization did. So what I was trying to explain is that Christian civilization condemned speech that was evil, but now we're moving into a civilization that is non-Christian, and they're going to do just the opposite. They're going to condemn speech that is good and only promote that which is evil, according to whatever agenda. How are we going to navigate that environment?
Well, what we see now, there are many voices, and some of those voices are very influential, trying to counterbalance, to come with not only a counter argument, but also to express, to bring something positive and to teach. Fortunately, again, partly because of the internet, because of the freedom of speech, anybody can use a channel and have a blog, and some of them are highly respected. At times, some of them, they don't have many people watching them, but they have an influence. That's the nature of things. That's the way who we are. What I'm saying is there is hope. There are many people who are already doing a lot, who have been doing a lot. Again, we are not living in a vacuum. We are the result of that history, that cultural capital. And that's why even the way we present ideas, when we talk about respect, certain values, we are the result of that culture, that Christian culture, going back millennia. And there are many people who are influential. Now, are you going to convince everybody? No. Is society to change overnight? No. And there are bad people and bad actors who have a lot of influence and power, and they are doing their best at doing that. By the same token, on the other hand, we have a lot of good people who are doing the best, at times in a quiet way, at home, at work, in the universities, in the school system, in society, even just you walk around and they are just normal people, nice people who are doing the best. And then by simple gestures, even by having conversations like this one, trying to establish our framework, what do we do, how do we behave? So there is hope, there are a lot of good things. The problem is that we are being tried to be convinced, they are trying to convince us that we have lost. And that's not the case. Actually, at times all you have to do is, when you deal with individuals or groups, and when you say, well, what you're saying is harmful and it's immoral and is deviant or is degenerate and it's not good for you as an individual, they freak out. They say, what would you mean? And then when you genuinely care about the individual, okay, where is this behavior coming from? Why? And then you realize there are people they are at times broken people. They have had traumas in their lives, or their parents, the individuals, and then they're trying to make sense and accept that, just like at times teenagers, they or even adults, the way they behave is in a way that they are going to hurt themselves, right? It's like somebody saying something that comes to mind. Oh, my girlfriend has left me. I'm going to go to the bar and get drunk, and I'm going to. Well, you are going to hurt yourself, right? But that was the response. Instead of trying to make sense, and I think as a society we are doing that. So hopefully in the next 10 or 20 years, we might see a comeback to something more the order, something that is good, because as a society we see that there are consequences.
Yeah. I mean, the last note I would close on myself is, I think about Pope Leo XIII's, his prophecy in 1888, which is how he came up with the Saint Michael, the prayer to Saint Michael. And he hears this conversation. He finishes saying Low Mass. He is traumatized and collapses to the ground, and people think he's dead. And he's out cold. His skin turns white. And all of a sudden he wakes up and he tells the people nearby, I heard a conversation between Jesus Christ and the devil. And the devil asked Jesus if he could reign in power in the next 75 or 100 years. And that was back in 1888. And Jesus Christ told the devil, yes, I will give you the time and I will give you the space. And I think that's precisely what we're living through now. And I think if we've learned anything from history, God allows us to live in wicked, evil times to test the faithful, because he knows many of his members will be severed from the branch, but those who stay are those who truly love God and they love the truth. And that's the real opportunity we have here is, yes, in Christian civilization, it was good that evil speech was condemned. It wasn't tolerated. And there was no platform for evil. There was only platform for good. But now that evil does have a platform and it's disseminated and it is running rampant through the veins of society, through institutions and everything, it's really allowing true Christians, true Catholics
but there's always been evil. I mean,
of course, yes. And there's been crisis in the church before, but I always think about that prayer because, we knew this was coming. We knew that times were going to get tough over this last century and going to the present. And this is our test. This is our trial.
The human behavior has always been the same. There's nothing in the 21st century, human behavior, good human behavior and bad, that is new. There's nothing in society that we can say, 2,000 years ago, people were not, when you look at the vices, the different, even the church talks about the 7 capital vices or sins. They are the same. They've always been around, and the virtues have always been around. I think individually and as a group and as a society, you have to just be aware and again educate yourselves to discern what is good, what is bad, and also to be humble to say, if I do this, these are the consequences, right? Yeah. And also everything going back to the freedom of speech, to speak in charity, be charitable as much as you can. Also, there are certain things that you are not allowed to. Detraction is another example. Detraction, you know about something bad about somebody, but those individuals, if you're not concerned about, if you're not going to be dealing with an individual, maybe it's not your role to start saying to everybody else, look, he or she is a wicked person. But because it happens all the time with the famous actors and actresses. It's like, well, why do we care? And then all of a sudden, it's a headline, and you think, well, you are at home.
Excuse me.
And then they shouldn't be broadcasting those things.
Right. But, yeah, I mean that's actually a really good point. We see all these people on TV who are living miserable lives. They're controlled and they try and play it off as if they have it all because they're rich and they have and they're famous and we're quick to judge the people we see on TV, but we always have to keep in mind, we need to be charitable to them insofar as we know that they are ignorant. They're ignorant in truth. They're clearly not happy people, especially behind closed doors. How many famous people who seemingly have it all are just miserable and lonely behind closed doors because they have no meaning or purpose to their life.
So something important, Adam, is to try to look for the good role models and try not to be influenced by the negativity in our society.
I don't know if we'll find good role models on TV though.
Not on TV, but there are many role models even through history.
Yes.
And in our society.
Yeah. But one thing you said, just before you keep going, one thing you said is to be charitable, and I agree, but we can't be charitable to the point that we compromise our faith.
Right.
There's limits to charity, and there's
actually you don't have to, that's the reality, and it's an important point. When somebody tries to convince you on something, you can say, well, I hear you, but these are my beliefs, or this is how I behave. Nobody's going to force you unless they have a gun or something. Yeah. But you don't have to follow something that is bad. You can just say, no, I don't believe. And usually they might respect you. And sometimes you might have to pay a price.
Yeah.
But you don't have to follow. But try to be positive and don't be convinced that that's what part of in the communist, part of the communist socialist propaganda, Marxist propaganda. They are very good at trying to convince you that you are being surrounded, that we are more people trying. And then the reality is there's a lot of cacophony, and because of the media, they make you think that you are being surrounded. And in reality, actually you are the majority. The good people, the people of goodwill, trying to lead a good life, a moral life, an ethical life, they are the majority. The ones who are trying to do the right thing in their private lives and professionally and at work, they are the majority. But because of especially nowadays, the media, they want to make you believe that, no, you are the majority. But don't be convinced of that. Don't trust them. It's a scam. It's like those people who want to scam you, they say, if you do this, it will be good for you. You're going to get more money. And it's part of the scam. If you are going to do this, something that is not good, that is immoral, you're going to be happy. You are going to be liberated. And this is a scam.
I mean, even if people of goodwill are just a minority now,
the majority.
But even if they were a minority, should that even stop you from trying to pursue what's good and what's true? Even if you were the last person on earth of goodwill.
That's it.
If you're pursuing the truth, what other people are doing in their evil ways, it shouldn't affect you.
I always say a gentleman is a majority. And in this case, applied to this, you know that what you're saying is true and is good. You don't have to have the majority.
And isn't that what free speech really is?
Right.
What is freedom? It's the pursuit of virtue. It's the pursuit of truth. That's what freedom really means. Because if freedom means you're free to pursue whatever you want, even evil, well, no, that's actually the opposite of freedom, because you're pursuing slavery.
Want to know, you are not free. You take the flight, an airplane, and then the pilot says, ladies and gentlemen, this is the flight to Toronto, but we're going to go to Vancouver. So, because I'm free. I have the freedom to do whatever I want. No, you don't. Well, he could do it, but he will not take another flight. Obviously, it will be the last flight he will ever take with a company. You are free to do what is right and what is good. Again, that's why as a society, you don't have the right to lie, because there are consequences, right?
Except you're allowed to say that you're a woman when you're actually a man, and vice versa. You actually are allowed to lie. Paradox, right?
It's a paradox. Yeah.
Anyways, great. I think that was a good conversation.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And
thank you.
Just be aware of, again, the more educated you are, and the more educated when it comes to ethics and morality and what is discerning, what is good, it really helps you to make sense of reality and to help other people. Great. Thank you.
Okay. That's it.
Very good.
That was good.
Would you like some coffee?
Yes, please.